Hi, I'm Alex from Zscaler Customer Success Engineering team. In this series of short videos, we're taking a look at baseline recommendations for configuring the Zero Trust browser function inside Zscaler Internet Access. This is part 1 of 2, Understanding Browser Isolation. Let's start by taking a look at the basics of browser isolation as a technology. Browser isolation is a web security technology that hosts users' web browsing sessions on a remote server instead of the user's endpoint. Browser isolation makes it so that active content in websites and web app sessions do not reach the end user devices. Instead, these sessions are rendered in a secure cloud container and are streamed to the user's browser as pixels, as a safe video stream of images. Everything taking place in the session is confined to Zscaler's cloud. Nothing can make its way onto the user device. This helps with two primary use cases. First is threat prevention, stopping malicious active content, including ransomware and malvertising, from infecting the user endpoint. Second is security for your apps and data. Browser isolation prevents sensitive files and data from reaching user endpoints directly. Again, this is done by moving the rendering of sessions away from local browsers and into secure containers in the cloud. Zscaler's high-performance security cloud delivers a pixel-perfect stream of images of the user's session to their devices, meaning their experience and productivity are preserved. Users also still get to use the browser of their choice. Next, let's take a look at the kill chain. Here we have a list of the different steps in the kill chain, and where on this kill chain the different Zscaler technologies are situated. Here we can see that browser isolation primarily happens at the very beginning of the kill chain. Browser isolation as a technology allows you to prevent infection from happening to the user's device, and therefore protect the device, the user, and their data. Next, let's take a look at some of the use cases where browser isolation may be useful. The first is user fatigue. If you've configured your web access policy to warn users about potentially malicious domains, you may find that users have started reflexively clicking on the "OK, take me to the page I want to go to" button in order to get on with their day, rather than reading the warnings you've configured. Next, you may wish to make available your applications via a secure clientless access form. Browser isolation can allow you to make your SaaS and private applications available via ZPA in an isolated environment to third-party users, vendors, or BYOD users. The next two use cases tend to come in a pair. If you have a secure URL policy, you may find that you blocked many destinations that are malicious or potentially malicious. This can lead to two complications. One of them is user dissatisfaction with blocked access to unclassified content, and the other is operational overhead and admin fatigue due to the management of exceptions for policies to unknown destinations. Browser isolation can help by allowing you to set in place a blanket isolation policy based on risk score to redirect potentially malicious or risky destinations to a browser isolation session, rather than blocking them outright and having to create exceptions to allow users to access them. Another use case is to allow access to personal webmail for your users without the security risks associated with this, i.e. data loss or potential ransomware. Finally, browser isolation can be leveraged to allow your SOC team to access risky destinations to perform threat research without actually exposing their devices or their work environments to those threats themselves. Before we get into the leading practices for configuring browser isolation in our next video, let's talk about some design considerations you may wish to think of when considering when and how to apply browser isolation. First, which URL categories or URLs need to be isolated? What cloud applications need to be isolated? What users, groups, or departments should be isolated for those destinations? What security controls need to be enforced in isolation, i.e. will you allow printing, copy-pasting, uploading, downloading, etc.? What exemptions should be put into place to avoid isolating certain destinations? And what process are you putting in place to review the exemptions on a regular basis? And lastly, it's important to understand that SSL inspection and authentication are prerequisites to isolating traffic. If your destinations are not inspected and your users are not authenticated, isolation will not be possible. Finally, for this video, let's take a look at an example of how you could start your isolation journey. First, leveraging the Smart Isolation feature, which automatically isolates suspicious destinations, you can create an easy rule that applies to the majority of your users and traffic to protect your users from suspicious content and suspicious destinations. Secondly, you can boost productivity by replacing destination blocks on uncategorized or miscellaneous, newly revived domains, personal webmail, social media, or blog categories, with isolation instead, in order to allow your users to access those destinations without any security risks. Once you've done this, you'll have the possibility to create granular policies based on user devices and using the risk score as an initiator for the policy itself. Thank you for watching. We'll cover this in more detail in the second video where we talk about building browser isolation policies.